A7R4's come out, so I guess you're now incapable of taking pictures? No. Although, why do people think as soon as a new camera comes out that somehow their camera's now worse at taking pictures than what it was before? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to kick this off with 2 points. Firstly, I would like to apologise in advance in case I sound odd. I have a very sore throat, but I will power on through. Again, because second note is I believe I must have discovered a black hole in my bedroom, because I filmed this once already, and when I took the memory card out of my camera I accidentally dropped it and it shot off somewhere on the floor. I have literally spent the last hour and a half turning this room inside out and I can't now find the damn thing, so guess I'll have to do it again with my knackered throat, and since subsequently found, you bastard. 8 months ago, I put a video out about the prospect of a Sony A7R IV and an A9 Mark II that was based around rumours at the time of Sony releasing a new 60 megapixel and 36 megapixel full-frame CMOS sensors. And at the time, the general consensus amongst the comments was that these sensors are likely not going to be seen in any A7 or A9 series body, at least in the immediate future. That more likely they were going to be seen in like high-end cinema cameras, the specialty cameras, and then maybe filter down in the future. And at the time, part of me thought maybe that was the case as well, but I guess we've just spent too long getting used to the way Canon does everything, because that's exactly not what Sony did. A couple of days ago, Sony took everybody by surprise by announcing the Sony A7R IV with the aforementioned 61 megapixel sensor. Now, in the last few days since the announcement, a few people have messaged asking my opinions on this camera and will I be doing a video on this camera, and the answer is yes. Usually I would do a video like as soon as the announcement was made, but unfortunately Sony dropped this announcement right when I was in the middle of being on holiday, so I kind of couldn't do it. But my overall impression of the A7R IV is it's impressive, but for the most part kind of pointless. It's kind of trying to be a jack-of-all-trades camera that it doesn't need to be. Because the R series is always high resolution, mainly aimed at stills photography, as opposed to moving photography. That would be video. Come on, Dave, wake up. It's aimed more at photography. That's how you should have said it, Dave. Now, the predecessor, the A7R III, shared the same 42 megapixel sensor as the predecessor to that, the A7R II. I've seen many people who own those cameras. I've never once heard anybody complain that those cameras don't have a high enough resolution. There might be some photographers out there that really need those extra 19 megapixels, but for the most part, I imagine the majority of people are still going to be more than happy with the 42 megapixels of the A7R III. But it's gone even higher resolution, to a point that I think might actually cause some people a problem, because the Sony lenses are split into 3 categories: G Master, G, and everything else. Now, the G Master lenses are rated by Sony to be able to resolve up to 100 megapixel sensors, not a problem. Their G series lenses, however, are only rated at 50 megapixels, and then presumably non-G series are even worse. All the previous Sony Alpha cameras fit within the G and G Master series capabilities, but if you're considering upgrading to the A7R IV and you're on G series lenses, then to get the maximum potential out of that sensor, you might need to consider upgrading your lenses as well, and that's just going to be even more costly. The other aspect is video. Now, again, the R is focused more at photography, so it's not really a videographer's camera, although they've always had video in them. But the video in the R4 is disappointing, surprising, and shocking at the same time. Disappointing because it's not improved. It's remained exactly the same as all the previous cameras, namely, it'll do 4K only at 30 frames a second, no 60, it'll do 1080 at 120 frames a second, and both of them max out at 100 megabits a second, so no higher bitrate. I don't even know how the 4K in the R4 is gonna work. On the R3, it was pixel bin down to 5K, then downsample to 4K. All I know of the R4 is that the APS-C mode crops into a 26 megapixel APS-C, so you get a 6K downsample to 4K, no pixel binning. But I don't know how the full frame 4K works. Presumably that's going to be a hell of a lot of pixel binning, so not really good for videographers. However, the camera does now come with real-time Iaf tracking, which would be perfect for video shooters, particularly in this scenario. However, from what I can tell, shockingly, the camera still has a 30-minute record limit. Even though the whole 30-minute record limit saga was brought about from import taxes arguing whether an item is classed as a camera or a camcorder if it recorded longer than 30 minutes. But that tax rule got scrapped last year, hence why Sony released the A7R IV with no record limit. But from what I can tell, the R4 has a 30-minute record limit, which is pointless. But what I'm liking about the R4 is everything else. You see, Sony didn't just take the R3 body and drop a new sensor and AF system in. It's a completely redesigned body. Now, I did speculate in that video 8 months ago that with all that extra resolution, shooting speeds, processing power required, and Sony's infamous overheating issues in the past, would they increase the size of the body to cover that off? Evidently, the answer was yes. Now, the increases are not particularly drastic, they're quite subtle. We're talking literally a few millimeters longer, a few millimeters higher, a few millimeters deeper. And I don't think it's more for managing heating issues as it is more just the general ergonomics. Now, I've said before, I don't find these bodies particularly uncomfortable to hold. I'm quite happy to shoot with this all day. However, I can see how a slightly bigger body would be more comfortable. Another point I see people bring up quite a lot, and this is more anti-mirrorless rather than anti-Sony from the pro DSLR people, is the electronic viewfinders. The whole, they prefer an optical versus an electronic, which is fair enough, it's personal preference. But I do think that EVFs, improving EVFs, is going to be a key target for camera manufacturers over the next couple of years. The way EVFs are going, they're just going to reach a point eventually where they're so crisp and sharp that you cannot tell the difference between an electronic and an optical. And it would be great if the A7 IV came out with the same EVF as the R4, although I imagine we're more likely to see the EVF from the R3, but we'll wait and see. Another big change that will please a lot of photographers, the exposure compensation dial. Now granted, if you're always shooting a manual, this dial, neither use nor ornament, makes no difference at all. However, if you tend to shoot in a semi-automatic mode like shutter or aperture priority, or you have your ISO set to auto, then this dial is relevant and can be a ginormous pain in the arse, because it's very easy to knock, so you can massively over or underexpose your image. Granted, on a mirrorless, it's not the end of the world, because as soon as you put the viewfinder to your eye, you can see your picture's not right and you can change it accordingly. Unlike a DSLR, where you hold it up to your eye, you think, oh, that looks fine, and you haven't realised your light meter's shot off the end of the scale. So, it's a pain in the arse, it's not the end of the world, but it's now not a problem on the R4 because they've put a little lock switch on there. Happy days. The next thing they've changed, the card slots, and they've actually changed a few things here. The first is that the previous generations were one UHS 2, one UHS 1. Which only really became a problem when you were trying to shoot both cards at the same time, because then it would slow your first card down to the speed of the second card. And speaking of first and seconds, this is where it got confusing, because maybe the Sony guys had the camera upside down when they designed it, but they put the slot 1 on the bottom and slot 2 on the top, which seems illogical. Thankfully, on the R4, they've put them the right way round, slot 1 on the top, slot 2 on the bottom. However, they've not changed everything. They've still kept the old screen, which is shit. It's not a particularly brilliant looking screen, it gets the job done, but that's about it. We still haven't got touch capabilities for the menus, which is just absurd, and the screen still only articulates up and down, there's no ability to fling it round. Now, I know the R's a stills camera, as I said before, and that's mainly a benefit for video shooters, so what difference does it make? Hopefully we will see this on the S series, maybe even the A7 IV, but it just seems strange that they do them on those cameras and not include it on the R4 if they were going to, but time will tell. So overall the A7R IV looks very impressive, but I imagine for most people it's kind of overkill. And I more imagine what we will see is people who weren't swayed by the A7 III, who still had issues with certain aspects of the camera, those improvements from the R4 will trickle into the A7 IV, and that will help draw more people into Sony. That and the introduction to the R4 is now going to drop the price of the R3 even more, and we're going to see people now starting to upgrade the R1 and the R2s, getting the R3 instead. But where do you fall on the spectrum? Are you going to be buying the R4? Are you going to be buying the R3 if the price comes down? Or are you going to be waiting for another camera? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. A bloody memory card better not turn up now. Better be gone forever.